Hi Becky, here is my first vlog. So there were like two or three things that I wanted to talk about that I thought were particularly interesting, based on the reading. So one of the first things that I thought was interesting is when they were going through the different type of economic systems that we're talking about. I thought it was really interesting when they talked about the supply side economics, or the what's more commonly known as the trickle down economics. Um, how it really did just kind of come out of left field, and there wasn't really any kind of basis or connection to any kind of economic systems that have been used. At least that's kind of what I got out of it from the reading. Um, and I thought that it was super interesting that it managed to catch on and become so popular despite not really having any kind of credibility or basis in any other kind of theory. Um, and that it still continues to be really strong despite any kind of like theoretical basis. So that was something that I thought was particularly really interesting, just seeing the history of where that came out of and comparing that to how strong of a hold it has, and how much people subscribe to it today. Was kind of an interesting juxtaposition to me, for me. Um, the other two other things that I thought were one that I thought was really interesting, and seeing how strongly kind of some older ideas have really held on, is looking at the Quincy report. A lot of that information, the way that that was organized, I think still really holds true today. In particular, the ways that I think it still really has a large effect on our social service agencies, is this idea that the success of an establishment is based on a board of overseers, or is what we would call them now, I think is what they mean, is like a board of directors. And this is something that I think has the potential, I think, to be, really important as far as like providing oversight for an organization and the services and the agency. But in my experience, at the agency that I'm at now, has actually been really damaging and damning, because the board of directors are not experienced and don't really have any knowledge of domestic violence services, which is the field that I'm in. Um, and the kind of the hierarchical nature of having the board of directors and the executive director, and that just that hierarchical structure, is, I think, just inherently antithetical to the values of social work in general, but also the values that we hold dear, for survivors, of like autonomy, being able to make decisions for yourselves and things like that. And so I just think, again, this is another example of something that from so long ago that has held on so strongly, despite the fact that I think that if you look at more evidence and research that's come out, more recently, you'll see that there is, other organizational models that can actually be successful, but people aren't interested in trying them because they just want to stick to what's been tried and true. Um, the other part that I thought was really interesting, was when they were talking about after the Civil War, all the different legislation or the bureau that existed to provide, newly freed slaves, um, assistance, and I had no idea that this ever existed, um, and I thought it was so interesting, and I thought it was so great. Um, but also, of course, wasn't particularly surprised to learn that it only lasted for a couple of years because, someone decided, oh, they've had enough, everything's fine, it's all good now, which obviously wasn't the case. But I just thought it was really interesting, and also really disheartening at the same time, that there was a system in place that recognized the inequalities um, that were created because of slavery, um, and but after 7 years, they were like, this is fine. And even still, and today, there are so many people who can't even recognize that the systemic inequalities and the historical marginalization and oppression continues to have a long lasting impact. And just kind of, once I read about that and did a little bit more research as well, it just made me think about like where things could be now if those types of policies would have been kept in place. Where systems of, where white supremacy would stand today. Um, the last argument that I thought was really interesting, and I kind of equated with like ideas of like white feminism, for example, is from the Stamped from the Beginning chapter, the idea of arguing against biological inferiority or racism, but not also arguing against social excuse me, but arguing against social inferiority and racism. And I think that's really really important right now, because I think that's what a lot of the racism and systems of and that we're seeing is that there's racism, but and people are hiding behind, well, I don't think that like people of color, there's anything like they're biologically inferior. But I think with a lot of the conversation, the way that it's going, inherent in that is this idea that there's some social inferiority. Like if they would have just listened and done what the police did, or if they wouldn't have acted a certain way or dressed a certain way. And you can even see in the ideas of like what professionalism in the workplace means, which is really just like forcing people of color to fit this image of whiteness. And so kind of thinking of things in that way has been really helpful for me when I'm doing self-reflection and talking to people around me about like, to really name and identify some of more subtle, implicit ways that people uphold racism, even though they don't think they are. Anyways, hope you're having a great day, and I will see you in class.